MB here. Hope you're all having a nice day. And in today's video, on this fine Christmas day, we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 budget decks in the Pokemon format right now. So, quite a little way back, I think it was a few months ago now, it doesn't feel that long ago, but it was quite a while now. I did a video looking at the top 5 budget decks. Well, this is kind of like a sequel or an update video, I guess, looking at the top 10. As always, if you have any suggestions of decks that I missed, then feel free to let me know, and I'll put them in the comment section. So coming in at number 10 is Groudon. So Groudon is more commonly seen with the likes of Kyogre and Volcarona V, as seen in the corner there, or just Volcarona, I guess. And you kind of have to use Cryogonal to power up Groudon. I personally don't like this strategy because it's very reliant on finding water energy as well as fighting energy, and that can be a little bit awkward sometimes. And I'd rather just use one attacker that's consistently strong. So that's kind of where I got to with Groudon. This was a original list that I borrowed from a Japanese website, How News, and then I tried to modify it to fit my own liking. So basically, what you're trying to do with this deck is use Chimaicho, this psychic Pokemon over here, to use Auspicious Tome, which says search your deck for Pokemon and a supporter card. So what we're using that for is to find our Groudon and our Bay supporter. Bay, B, however you want to pronounce it. And then Bay is going to be discarding the top 5 cards of your deck and then attaching any number of fighting energy to your benched fighting Pokemon. So we can use, well, just energy in general. So we can use that to attach to Groudon and I guess Galarian Zapdos. The original list played more copies of Zapdos, but I only played one copy because I don't think the Polaris effect is very strong on the Zapper Kicker. However, Zapdos is really good just because it's a nice free retreat option. Because if we start the game with Groudon, it can be a little bit annoying. So we want to start the game with either Chimaicho or Zapdos. And then from there, we can just use Bay and hopefully do a lot of damage with Magma Volcano. For a deck that's easy to play and just for learning in general, I think this is a really solid meme deck. I don't think it's tournament worthy at all, but it is a lot of fun to play and I recommend you try it out. So coming in at 9th place is a deck I've featured on the channel pretty recently, and it's sort of just a one price Hound Doom single strike deck. So for those of you who really don't know, Hound Doom has an ability that lets you search your deck for single strike energy and attach it to one of your Pokemon. And so you can use this to power up different single strike attackers, providing that your single strike energy is providing, fighting and dark energy types. So you can only really use fighting or dark attackers. The more common ones are Primeape and single strike Urshifu, but my favorite is by far Yveltal or Sturmdurner. So Yveltal does 110 damage for 3, which isn't very much, but combined with single strike energy, you're able to do a little bit more than that, allowing you to potentially just hit massive damage on stuff like Mew VMAX. And then I also play Sturmdurner to hit weakness damage on stuff like Blissey, which is also seeing a lot of play right now. So that's what it's there for. So you're kind of covering 2 different weakness damages. As for the deck itself, it's pretty straightforward, pretty easy to play. You just have to get a bunch of Hound Doom, and the deck is also playing a Sobble and Taillon line, which I know is fairly expensive to acquire right now, but this is a good starting point if you're trying to build either a single strike deck and you're not sure if you want to fully commit to the archetype, or if you're building an Inteleon build, perhaps, because I do think Inteleon is pretty good in this. So that's it for Yveltal and Sturmdurner. It's also worth noting that most of the cards in here are very cheap, apart from the Hound Dooms and the Inteleon. They're probably the most expensive cards in the deck. Moving on, we have Sandaconda, which is a bit of a fan favorite, but it's sort of like the Groudon deck. I can't decide which is better, so I have this one slightly higher on the list. So Sandaconda says, discard the top 6 cards of your deck, and you do 60 damage for each fighting energy card. And then you have to discard all the cards. So Groudon, on the plus side, you're only discarding 5 cards and you're doing a lot more damage. However, Sandaconda, it's a lot easier to kind of get into position where you're doing at least 240 damage in the 240 damage-ish in the late game. And if you say that, if you're discarding top 6 cards of your deck and only 3 of those are energy, you're still doing 180 damage. Now, admittedly, the deck kind of struggles to chain attackers, which is why you have to run Peony for the early game, which is discard your hand, search your deck for any 2 trainer cards, i.e. Evolution Incense or Energy Recyclers. And then you also play 4 Clara, which is going to allow you to get a 1-1 Sandaconda line, or 2 Sandaconda if you've discarded any, and 2 basic energies, because you still need to manual attach for Big Sand Cannon. This list is also playing 2 Energy Recycler, just to shovel in some energy in the late game and try and guarantee a bigger hit. It's a pretty good budget deck. I don't think it's particularly amazing by any sense of regards, but it is a lot of fun to try out and can catch some people off guard. It also has a pretty good matchup against 3 prize decks that kind of struggle to do a lot of damage. So, for example, something like Victini VMAX, for example, can only do 100 damage to Conda, whereas you can do a lot more damage to them, and it's obviously a great price trade. Moving on a little bit is Wishy Washy, which is a deck that really surprised me, honestly. I didn't think Wishy Washy would be that good. But what Wishy Washy says is it has an attack schooling shot, does 30 damage, and then 30 more for every basic energy attached to him. So the whole idea is you're going to try and get at least 4 or 5 basic energies on Wishy Washy and just try and do 2-hit kills. It's obviously quite possible with Frostmoth to actually 1-hit KO Pokemon in the late game, and it is funny when you were able to pull that off. But for the times when you can't pull it off, we also have a Basculin from Fusion Strike. It says Swarm the Wound, does 30 damage, and then 10 more for every damage counter. So rather than stack loads and loads of energy on Wishy Washy, which can be very costly on the deck, we ideally want to put 2 energy on Basculin and then come in and do a 2-hit KO out of nowhere, with Basculin finishing them off. And then, of course, the rest of the deck is pretty straightforward. We do play a high count of energy because we kind of need to, but then the rest is just basic supporters, items, all the regular staples from decks that you need. A 4/4 Frostmoth line is probably the hardest thing to acquire from this deck, or the Jiraachis, but other than that, it's a really cheap deck, and I recommend you try it out. So the next is also pretty much a classic deck that was requested on the last video and it didn't make it in, and that's Charizard. Charizard, I think, is a really strong attacker. It just isn't in the right place in the format right now. Like, there's just too many things that annoy Charizard that bit too much to prevent it from being a good deck. I.e., the fact that it has to use Raihan a lot to accelerate energy to use Royal Blaze. So, for those of you who don't know, Charizard has an attack called Royal Blaze. It does 100 damage and then 50 more for each Leon in your discard pile. So, in the late game, we can potentially get up to like 300 damage, which is cool and everything, but it's still only going to be 2-hit killing VMAXs, so ideally, we need at least 4, well, not 4 Leons, but 2 or 3 Leons in the discard pile is a good number usually. And especially if we're playing Leon every turn, then that's often works out pretty well. The rest of the list is pretty straightforward. We do play 4 Heat Fire Energy, which I think is important actually for Leonzard, because 170 hit points, although it's tanky, it's not that quite tanky enough, so 190 is just a lot better. Then we also have the option to play Cincino. I know a lot of people prefer Cincino to Jirachi. I was trying out Jirachi because I thought it just made a bit more sense just to be able to choose what you take with the Dreamy Revelation ability and then try and use the Battle Sense ability on Charizard. But you can play Cincino if it's just easier and cheaper to acquire, but either way, the deck itself is actually not that expensive to put together. There's also the option to play 4 Chromatic for Battle VIP Pass, which you'll see a lot in this video being mentioned. Chromatic says you can only use this card if you discard another item card from your hand, which can be a bit problematic, but it does say flip a coin, and if heads, you have to search your deck for any card. So the reason why this is good in a stage 2 deck is it lets you find rare candy potentially, your energy for turn, your Leon in this case, your Charizard if you need it, a switch, a boss, a research, and that's why I think it's really good. Battle VIP Pass is what you would often pair it with, and it's in a lot of decks together as a combo, especially likes of Mew and Gengar. Battle VIP Pass says you can only use it on the first turn, but if you do, search your deck for 2 basic Pokemon, so you can use it to find your Charmanders, your Jirachi, or your Aranguru. I think Battle VIP Pass and Chromatic, if you can fit them in, are better in the Cincino variant. I think they combo well together, especially since you can discard Battle VIP Pass in the late game with Cincino. But in this particular build, I'm not running either, so I didn't think it was necessary. Moving on a bit is, I think, a really underrated deck that I, again, also featured recently on the channel. And it's a really cheap deck, minus the Crobat, that has been on the ladder recently, so it shouldn't be too expensive. And that is Raichu. Raichu has 2 really good attacks, Big Sparking that does 50 damage to each Pokemon V and GX in play, which is why Crobat is unideal to have on the bench, but it can be. It does provide like a way out. You know, if you're dead drawing, then it's always important to be able to quick ball for something like that. But either way, Big Sparking, really strong attack, doing 50 to every V. And then obviously we have Telescopic Sight, that lets us do an extra 30 damage. So we can do 80 damage to each of our opponent's V and VMAX, which is really strong. And then the second attack does 180 for 3 energy, Thunderbolt, and then discard all energy attached to Raichu. And how we can change Thunderbolt, which is pretty easy to do once we set them all up, is with Flaffy. So Flaffy, commonly seen with Rayquaza, but I honestly think this is actually better than Rayquaza. I don't have the results to prove that, but I do think this is a really good deck. But Flaffy just allows you to accelerate lightning energy, and as soon as you have at least a couple of Flaffy down, 1 or 2 Flaffy, a couple of Raichu, then all of a sudden you can use Thunderbolt every turn to do 180, or you can start using Big Sparking in the early game to do 80, 50 here, 50 there, and it all works out pretty well. Again, this deck is supposed to be really cheap to pick up. If you don't have a Crobat and you don't want to trade for one, then I would suggest either a 4th Speed Lightning Energy, a 4th Stormy Mountain, or a 10th Lightning Energy. I have not tried Battle VIP Pass in this deck or Chromatic. It may be worth experimenting with them, but I don't want to try them out just yet. I'll do it for Raichu. And then moving on to our top decks here, we have Zoroark. So this is a really interesting deck. It's not real. I don't really recommend this at a beginner level because I think it's quite a hard deck to play. But basically what Zoroark says is once in your turn, you may swap it with another Stage 1 Pokemon in your discard pile, excluding VMAX, of course. And then you have to discard all cards attached to Zoroark. So this provides quite a kind of counterbox deck where you can essentially switch into any one of these attackers. So we have Garbodor for the late game if you have loads of tool cards in your discard pile and you want to hit weakness against Mew. We have Flapple that does 50 damage for each of your opponent's abilities in play, which is really strong against stuff like Mew, Gengar, Urshifu sometimes if they overbench. Decks like that. Flapple's really strong. You also have a Gliscod, so that's Hard Time Slash. It does 30 damage and then 50 more for each of your opponent's V and GX in play. And then 1 copy of Banette with Resolute Spite that says puts up to 7 damage counters on Banette and you do 20 for each one. Really good Urshifu counter. And then Barraskewda with Targeted Skewer does 20 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon for each damage counter on that Pokemon. So Barraskewda is definitely more of a sniping card for the late game. And then we have a Cincino engine, which can help for discarding excess Battle VIP Pass and discarding the Stage 1s. What I think is really good about this deck and why it's quite high up on this list is Zoroark is just, as soon as you get a couple of Zoras and Zoroarks into play, you don't need to be able to kind of recycle your other Stage 1s. As long as you can recycle your Zoroark back into your deck, that's all you really need to do, because say your opponent has been really foolish, they're playing Eternatus, for example, and they bench loads of Crobats, and like loads of Eternatus, loads of Pokemon with abilities, and like loads of V Pokemon as well. So then your first Zoroark switches into Gliscod and you do massive damage. Well, then the next turn, providing you have a Zoroark, you can then switch into the same Gliscod, providing the Gliscod had, of course, been knocked out. So what I'm essentially saying is, and I'm doing a very bad job of explaining it, you don't need to be able to recycle all your individual attackers. You just need to be able to recycle Zoroark with Ordinary Rod. And then after that, you can come in there with Flapple, turn after turn, as long as you have the energy. So that's why I think it's a really good deck. It's a pretty good budget deck. It's worth trying out. I wouldn't recommend it at a beginner level, but I would recommend it as a budget deck that's worth experimenting with. So moving on a little bit, we have the Charm Reggie Drago deck. A little bit of a clunky deck with multiple Stage 1s and no true draw engine apart from Jirachi. Maybe you run Crobat in here, I'm not sure yet. But either way, Reggie Drago has the massive attack Dragon Energy that does 240 damage and then minus 20 for each damage counter on Reggie Drago. The only reason I'm not a fan of Reggie Drago myself personally is because Inteleon is everywhere right now, and so is Jolteon. And I would prefer using attackers like Tapu Bulu, which can just do flat 160 with Nature's Judgment, which I think is just a lot better. But the consensus out is whether or not Reggie Drago is better than Tapu Bulu. I think a lot of people think Reggie Drago is better, but for 240, it's great. It's just a lot of problems against Inteleon, I would say. But either way, I still think this is a really good deck to try out. It's also one of the ones from his list that sees a lot of play in tournaments, a bit like the Zoroark deck previously. Reggie Drago does pop up there now and here at stuff like the Sunday Open, so I do recommend building this if you're looking to try. If you like playing multiple energy types as well, and you like messing around with different Pokemon, then this is a pretty cheap deck to pick up. And then, of course, we have the Battle VIP Pass Chromatic in the corner, just suggesting these are here if you want to play them, because this deck is running Gossifleur, Charby, Jirachi, Bulu, Trapias, Reggie Drago. It's a lot of different basics, so it might be worth consideration. Moving on to our top 2 decks, we have Galarian Obstagoon. This was hyped to be probably the best one prizer. I don't think it is the best one prize attacker right now, but it is one of the best budget decks. Unfortunately, I would say Obstagoon isn't the cheapest deck on this list, especially considering Inteleon is like 3 or 4 packs right now. But Obstagoon himself, either way, is a pretty good deck. It's just a lot of fun, it's easy to play, and it can pick up a lot of easy wins on the ladder as well, because it's pretty low maintenance. Lost the words there. So Obstagoon has the attack and Merciless Strike that does 60 damage, 60, and then if your opponent's active has any damage counts already, it does 90 more, so essentially you're doing 150. It doesn't sound particularly great, but then of course you have the Inteleon to do 2 more damage counters, you have the Galarian Zoroark to place another damage counter, you have Galarian Obstagoon to place 3 if you want to use it, so then there's just easier ways of pushing your opponent's VMAX into 2 KO range, and then after that we just need to play stuff like Raihan and Lucky Egg to consistently chain our Obstagoon, and it's really easy deck to play. And unlike, I would say, a lot of decks, such as the one we looked at previously, Reggie Drago, where every game, no matter if you win or lose, it's going to be a pretty high maintenance deck. You know, you need to be benching loads of Charbys, Gossifleurs in the early game to find all the different evolutions, the energy to attach. Like Obstagoon, it's a lot more simple, so I think it's a lot easier to play at a tournament level. It also encourages the use of Inteleon, so if you're looking to play a more competitive version of Inteleon, then it's good. But this is honestly a deck that can do really well at events, and I can't say that for the most of the decks on this list. You know, Santa Conda players can dream, but I don't think Santa Conda is going to be doing very well at any event, whereas this deck has serious potential to, you know, make top 18 or whatever. So I think Galarian Obstagoon, really solid place to start. Pretty expensive, but it is really easy to play, and it's definitely one of the better single prize attackers. So the best single prize attacker, in my opinion, has got to be Malamar. It consistently proves that it's a good deck, even though I can't seem to play this deck for the life of me. I keep trying and I keep failing. This is, tournament-wise, the best single prize deck to play right now. It does have something to do with the attack Rapid Strike Tentacles doing 40 damage for every Rapid Strike card you reveal from your hand and shuffle back into your deck. And this essentially allows you to just steamroll through things such as Urshifu, makes that a breeze, and then again, stuff like VMAX decks, something like Victini, something like Glaceon, something like maybe even Jolteon at some points in the game. You're just so much more favorable than them because you're doing easy 2-hit KOs. You're stage 1 as well, so it's not like you're not like you're playing the Leonzard where you need 2 energy on a stage 2 every turn. Malamar is just a stage 1 needing 1 energy every turn, so very like high maintenance deck, I would say. It's not really a deck that's easy to play at a high tournament level, but if you can get the hang of it and you can learn all the combos and stuff, then I would say it's definitely a really good pick. That and the fact that this deck is also playing the Inteleon engine. If you can't afford the Inteleon engine, or you don't want to play it because you want more variety in your decks, then definitely just play the Cincino build. You can play Cincino, Octillery, Malamar, and it's fine. But I think this list came 2nd or 3rd at a recent event, and that's why I picked it. But either way, this is probably the best single prize attacker in the game right now, and definitely the best budget deck. And this has been Amber. Let me know what you think in the comment section of the list. Who did I miss out? Did I leave any important decks looking back through this list? And hopefully I'll see you all next time. Thank you for watching.